Great. Seems like we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session on building the modern data stack, or I should say, rethinking the modern data stack. My name is Apoorv Pandey. I'm a partner at Foundation Capital. For all those who are new to Foundation as well as Build, Foundation is an early stage venture fund, been around for 25 plus years. We invest primarily in enterprise and fintech. We look at investing in dreamers across the stack. And talking of dreamers, we have three amazing panelists over here. Before they introduce themselves, a quick rundown of the format. I'll be talking to them for approximately 30 minutes. I'm hoping to do so to kind of wrap up most of the conversation. And after that, there'll be a Q&A. So feel free to drop your questions and comments. I'll weave that into our discussion as we go. Or I'll pick those questions up in the end, in the last 10 to 15 minutes. All right, to kick this off, Martin, it'll be great if you could start with the introduction, just the spirit of covering everything. If you could talk a bit about your background before Starburst as well, and a bit of description of Starburst would be super helpful. And then we'll go with Naveen and Dan after that.
Hi, Apoorv. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me here. My name is Martin Traverso. I'm CTO and co-founder at Starburst. I'm also one of the creators of Presto and Trino. Presto is a project we started back in 2012 at Facebook to solve we had an acute need at Facebook for doing analytics at scale, interactive analytic at scale. And there was no good solution at the time at the company. So we started the project from the ground up. We decided to make it open source. And then it became very popular across the whole, the country, across the US and across the world. And today it's being used by thousands of companies. And then when I left Facebook, then I joined Starburst. Starburst is a company that's built around Presto and now Trino. We commercialize Trino. We're building products around it. We just launched it's a cloud offering of Trino, which you can try. You can try now if you want. So I've been building distributed systems for many years. I have a background in computer science, and I guess when I was working at Facebook, I applied all those that experience to build what eventually became Presto.
Thanks, Martin. Naveen, it'd be great to hear your background as well.
Yeah, Naveen Punjabi. I lead our data analytics and AI technology partner ecosystem at Google Cloud. I've been at Google for about 5 years. My journey prior to that has been in 2011 is when I really immersed myself in the world of data. There was a lot of revolution happening around with Cloudera, Hortonworks, and many other companies around that ecosystem. Prior to Google, I was at Attunity, which is now acquired by Click, and helping drive the partnerships there. So the journey at Google Cloud has been amazing. There's a lot of evolution that we have seen across the last 5.5 years. And if I were to look back, what the ecosystem looked like then versus now, I'm truly amazed and quite excited about where we are headed, honestly.
Thanks, Naveen. Dan, it'd be great to hear your background too.
Howdy, I'm Dan. I'm CTO at Heap. I've been working on Heap for the last 8 years, almost 9 years. We build product analytics software. The thing that makes Heap so special is that it's built on a technology we created that the industry now refers to as auto capture, where the idea is that Heap has everything your users do, rather than just the stuff you thought to explicitly track, and that enables internal a degree of agility and data access that's impossible with other ways of trying to understand your users. And it also allows us to do a bunch of other really cool stuff with proactively guiding you towards insights about users. Long story. If you want, I'll talk your ear off about it. Bother me if you're enjoying this at home. But I've been at Heap for the last eight years and change. As I mentioned, prior to Heap, I was at a company called Palantir that a lot of you probably know, working on similar kinds of challenges around making data actually practical within enormous institutions. So I've been working on this stuff for a while.
Sounds great. Thank you. As like everyone can see, like each one of you are in like different walks of the data layer and at different parts of the consumption layer as well. I think one of the things that's happening in the industry today is this continuous transformation, where on one side, enterprises are not just like adopting cloud in an accelerated way, but also rethinking their software development cycles. But on the other hand, data is becoming like front and center to each and every one in an organization. And if you just peel back the data layer or the stack, if you think of the building blocks, there are kind of these two emerging philosophies, right? One part of it is the data warehouse or the full stack side of things, where there are the likes of Snowflake and obviously each of the cloud providers, including Google, have their own data warehouse. And then there's this full stack Snowflake, which is another solution on the homogeneous side of things. And then there's this heterogeneity being created on the other side, on top of the data lake itself, where you don't need to kind of own the data of the customer. The customer can have data wherever they want, and you create that flexibility for the end user to utilize that data for whether analysis purposes or prediction purposes. So let's take the first part of that philosophy, where the homogeneous part of the stack is being built out, at least on top of the warehouse. There are more things that are emerging as data flows into your warehouse. Customers are looking for services around cataloging, lineage, data quality, transformation, and there are like these different layers being created on top of the data warehouse. Love to start with Naveen and get his perspective on like which parts of these categories do you think are addressing like the most acute need today, and what part do you think is still missing on top of the data warehouse?
Yeah, there's a quite a bit to talk in that area, and I like to think about customer needs along the continuum of their analytics journey, if you will. So one of the things that we have seen, especially interacting with customers while we are at Google Cloud, is organizations start their analytics journey in a framework, and the first step they want to solve for is, how do I have limitless access to all of my data to drive my insights? And this can include customers modernizing from their legacy data warehouse, data lakes to cloud. It means application and database modernization, transactional systems and analytical workloads coming together. So goes beyond access to all the data types. In this journey, especially if you are in this journey, what we have seen is scalable data ingestion and transformation is like a critical need, because if you don't have that, you're in some ways very dependent in terms of your ramp to the cloud. And a lot of it is codified today, and it needs to go into a self-service approach. So I would call out data ingestion and transformation, more of automated transformation capabilities as a critical pillar of that. The next phase of that tends to be around, for organizations, is to, how do I enable analytics within the rest of my organization? Every organization is using, has data across different environments, not just cloud, but also on-premise. So how do I enable federated analytics across those environments? And as a result of that, centralized data discovery, cataloging, and governance becomes important, because now you're enabling access of your data layer to so many stakeholders within the organization, and you need to have that in some way in compliance. So that's the second one. The third one, which I think is still evolving, where a lot of the organizations are starting to go, is building, once you have your data layer defined, how do you build more of a data factory model, where you're building a set of data products that you're giving access to your partners or your net new customers. And if you're in that framework, you want to make sure that you are leveraging all these scalable capabilities that are available today. A lot of it is around intelligence, which is why scalable ML ops, data science becomes a critical function to enable that step. So that's how I think about it. There are other quite interesting areas in between as well, but if you were to push me to the wall and say which are the three, that's what I would call out.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's awesome. It's a great framework. I have obviously tons of questions, but before I spend most of my time on that, moving to Martin. Martin, today customers are using Trino slash Presto on top of the warehouse. They are also using it on top of their data lake as well. What are you seeing as kind of the emerging part of the stack for your end users, and what do you think is missing in that?
Well, I will say what Naveen described is actually pretty spot on. We see something very, very, very close to what he was describing. One of the, and depending on which companies, which organizations you're talking about, they have their acute needs are kind of different in the different areas. One of the things we see a lot, especially for larger enterprises, you end up with organizations that have very diverse data silos across the organization, different divisions, maybe even through acquisitions. Like one company acquires another, they inherit all the infrastructure and technology from the company, and the challenge is how do you bring all that data together to be able to drive insights. And the challenge is one of the biggest challenges, and this is kind of the more traditional approach, is designing the processes to bring data into a single data warehouse, which end up causing very long lead times, lack of flexibility, lack of speed. Like you can't really do anything very quickly. Like if you want to do some analysis, you end up with having to wait like weeks or months before someone puts the bit of information that you need in order to be able to join it against something else. So I think that's one of the biggest needs we're seeing. Has to do with data federation, how you ETL and so on. And it's actually one of the things that we see people trying to solve with Trino. Trino has an architecture that allows you to read data from different data sources transparently, and it's one of the main features that people are looking for when they use that kind of tool. Is like the ability to transparently be able to get all this data, bring all the data together, drive insights without having to pay for those long lead time, development times, and lack of flexibility.
Dan, as a practitioner who's building the infrastructure stack for Heap, data infrastructure stack for Heap, what kind of decisions have you taken more recently around using the warehouse or the lake, and are there any like best practices that like founders can learn from who are building analytics products on top of this entire new stack that is emerging?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if you think about like Heap's a SaaS product, I think about things with like a SaaS product lens. Mm-hmm. If you think about an internal data stack as an internal product that people need to use, one of the parts that I think is just really hard to get right, and in my opinion is actually, like to your previous question, is the category with the most with the most new stuff emerging that's exciting. Like if you think of your data stack as an internal SaaS product or an internal product that people need to use, the onboarding for these products is just awful. Like it's really, really hard as a person just working in a company that has a warehouse to know what's in there, like what columns do I trust, what is the schema, what are the join things that I should know how to use, what lives where. So I mean, I think all these things are all these categories you described earlier, the metrics, quality, lineage, transformation, all that stuff is really important. But like I don't think anyone has really cracked the nut yet on building like cataloging that's good enough to suffice as the onboarding to the internal data stack. I think Stemma is like one of the more interesting players doing this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. It's like really way beyond a catalog. It also shows you like who is using this and what are the recent queries, and like show me some example queries I can work from. Like if you show me some SQL, I can start to play with it. But if you just tell me like, oh, it's in that warehouse, like there's no universe where I'm going to get any value out of this.
Right.
Narrator AI is another really interesting one. They take a really different approach, which is like bring some really strong opinion to what the metrics are that matter, and then like build some kind of mapping glue themselves, and then you can kind of do open-ended exploration from there. You save analyses. It's different, but if you think about it as like onboarding to the data stack, like they're both like, if you squint your eyes, kind of solving a similar problem. Mm-hmm. But if you want to throw a challenge in there that I think is like totally unmet, or I haven't seen anything that I think even comes close to solving this problem, if you think about your internal data stack like a problem or like a product, I should say,
Mhm.
the data teams developing this quote product have absolutely none of the things they need to be agile in the way we would expect for like a SaaS product. And
Mhm.
so like the things that you need to make changes, like combining things into one warehouse or changing schemas or changing like we have like DBT as an industry, which is an incredible piece of it's like glue. But like if I actually want to like iterate on this with a release cycle and make changes to my overall data stack at the level of like what is stored where, what are the schemas, and what's in what warehouse, like what's in lakes, that it's I think we're so bad at this that almost no one ever tries. The projects are always total disasters. But it's the problems don't go anywhere for the same reasons as Martin mentioned, which is that like you have inorganic growth, like company A buys company B. You now have 2 warehouses, and like someone needs like the problem is just inherent in the complexity of enterprise scale. So I kind of think like a lot of the like data mesh hype or data mesh stuff that's out there is actually like kind of a religion of thirst, in the sense that like I think the thing we actually should want to do is not have data meshes at all. Or I would argue that they make sense for an incredibly small number of incredibly huge institutions.
Yeah.
But we are so bad at making changes at the data layer because like the tool chain doesn't exist and the techniques don't exist for being agile that way. That data teams are basically all waterfall for this reason.
Mhm.
And then we can't make changes because it's not agile enough, and thus we're like constructing best practices around a world where we can make no major changes, which is like
That's a great point. I think thinking of the data stack as a product, thinking of that as like how can you easily onboard like people who are new to the organization or not as skilled as the most skilled data folks or data engineers as a part of your team. I think it's a great segue into this topic of like a lot of organizations are trying to empower like the less sophisticated folks or less technical folks, I should say, on the data team, which could include like people who don't have engineering backgrounds. They have more mathematical or statistical backgrounds, or might not even have those. So right from like business users to analysts who understand SQL to even like people who just understand Python, they may or may not be core data scientists. And there's a lot to learn from like a product like Heap, for example, over here, because you guys are focusing on product managers, and I'm sure there's a big emphasis on reducing dependence on the technical audience as you get more insights from Heap. Dan, would be great to understand like how are you taking that decision and all those decisions around making PMs more autonomous with Heap in your journey?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like there are a couple of fundamental limitations. I would argue that anything built on like one of the reasons Heap solves this problem so well is that a product analytics tool can be so much more opinionated and so much more tailored to the needs of a PM that you just enable a degree of self-sufficiency that's totally impossible with other tools. So like a great example would be like a core thing a PM needs to do is evaluate a conversion funnel. What percentage of my users do I lose at step A versus step B versus step C? Like try doing that in a warehouse. No PM is sophisticated or patient enough to do that for like a 7-step funnel filtered for users who came in from XYZ campaign and where the time from completion is. But like it's like I would argue like that kind of usage isn't well served, will never be well served by like BI tools and warehouses because it's so specific to needs that a product person has. So like first piece is like have a product specific tool at all for your business users, or have a marketing specific tool for your marketers and all that stuff. And then I think, this is like a bit Heap specific, but like part of the whole Heap worldview is that enabling business users to get to the data they need is often the biggest bottleneck to value in the first place, which is why the whole auto capture approach is so transformative. Like you don't need to go to a data team or engineers or something like that to get something tracked and get in the tool. You just have everything and you can use it. But I promised I wouldn't make a sales pitch today, so I won't. But yeah, I mean, like I think this is really where the future of data teams winds up. Like I would say the percentage of data teams that I've talked to who are, to some degree drowning in doing custom reporting for other folks in the org or like one-offs like that is like about 100, because like the more staffing you have, the more questions you get. So like you basically never get out of that trap. And the only real solution in the long term is like set up the stack with tools like like Heap and with equivalent sales and marketing specific tools such that business users can answer their own questions. And then you're using your data team on like building the data product for way more complex kinds of analyses, or performing like the really rich in-depth analyses that only a specialist can do, or something like that.
That makes a ton of sense. Martin, Trino has become a core part of the data stack for a lot of organizations, where it's kind of the go-to product for analysts. In terms of Trino's or Starburst's ecosystem, when you think about like other tools beyond SQL engines, beyond Trino, like what are the other tools in your ecosystem that you maybe think about or look up to in terms of what they are doing for empowering the less technical folks in any organization?
Yeah, I think so. When I look at Trino, you can think of Trino as being kind of in the middle of the analytics stack. You have underneath, you have the infrastructure, you have data storage, metadata management, how you manage security and all that. I would say in that category, I would say Iceberg is one of those projects I think is becoming transformational in the Hadoop Hive ecosystem, and we can talk a bit about that in a moment. But then and then on top there's a set of tools like especially around open source that have started to appear like from a few years ago. Like Superset is one of those tools that. There was nothing like that aside from commercial tools that allow you to do analytics and build dashboards and be able to slice and dice and explore your data in a visual way that is more accessible to people. I mean, SQL is powerful, but not everyone understands it. And being able to build things that are higher level, it's super important for analysts. I mean, I'm not familiar. Dan was talking about some industry or use case specific tools. I'm not very familiar with those, but I have. When we're at Facebook, we actually built a bunch of those. Like, for example, we had an A/B testing system, and we had to build a dedicated interface and tool for our analysts to be able to analyze the results of experiments when features were being rolled out. So tools like that can also be powerful. I'm just not aware of any that interacts with Trino in open source or outside in the larger industry. And then there are a set of other tools like kind of are in this. You could say they are at the same level as Trino. For example, there's Apache Pinot that has been gaining popularity over the past couple of years. And it serves a different purpose and different niche. Like it's also like a tool you can use for doing analytics, but it's designed for use cases where I know you have analytics on your website. You are doing a very, very high QPS. Like those are use cases that Trino won't support. So it's kind of a good complement. And actually, Trino can integrate with Pinot if you want to combine both. Yeah.
Just double clicking on that aspect of like, you mentioned Superset, you mentioned something like a Pinot, and these are like, Superset is for visualizing data, Pinot is for like providing sub-second latency OLAP database, which enables sub-second latency use cases. I'm wondering like, what are you seeing in terms of consumption patterns for users? Everyone talks about real time, and like there are not as many use cases for sub-second latency over here. Like, do you see like consumption patterns changing from like a couple of hours to minutes to seconds, at least on the SQL side? What's been your observation?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of people conflate terms here when they talk about real time. That could mean a bunch of different things. So it could be like you want to get to your results very, very quickly. Like you have a dashboard, you load a web page, your results have to come back in at most a couple seconds. Otherwise, your page doesn't have the interactivity you want, or you need to be able to click and slice and dice, and you need that to be very, very fast. That's one kind of real time. The other kind of real time is how quickly does an event that happens in your data source reflect in the analytics that you're performing. For example, if you have some user visits your website, how long does it take for that impression, that event, to make it into your data store so you can analyze it? So on the first type of real time, like the fast interactive queries, that, I mean, we see a lot of a very huge need for that. Like, people want to be able to get insights on their data quickly. Like if you have a query that takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, you issue your query, and then you have to go do something else. So people lose context. They can be as effective or as efficient at doing analysis as they could. And it can be frustrating too. That's actually one of the reasons we built Presto in the first place in 2012. For the other case, it depends. I find that more of a niche type of usage. Like, most people are generally okay with data showing up within a few minutes to a couple hours. Like, it's very, very rare that you really have to see results up to the second. Like, when something happens on your application, your website, your data source, that you have to be able to see those results immediately. Now, there are definitely companies that care about that, and there are certain use cases that matter, but it tends to be more of a niche type of use case.
Yeah, and while we are at it, before I move to Naveen, someone had a question which is relevant to what you just said. What do you think is the cutoff for real time based on use cases you see? Is it like a couple of minutes, a minute, less than that? Like, what do you see as the cutoff? I think people are trying to figure out latency at their end as well in terms of what they're building. So it feels like it's a relevant question.
So are you talking about the ingestion and how quickly?
I think in terms of end use cases, like when you think of like end use cases for both end user use cases as well as internal use cases, like, do you see like few minutes to few seconds, or what's the latency cutoff that you see?
Well, if we're talking about interactivity, like be able to slice and dice and analyze, iterate over your data sets. Anything that goes beyond a couple of minutes, it gets in the way of people being able to do things. So, I mean, there's also an expectation. People tend to adapt to their expectations based on the complexity of what they're doing. So if they know if they're processing, petabytes of data and the queries are complex, then okay, well, maybe I do something. I budget my time so that I run a query and then I come back to it later when it's completed. But for being able to very quickly, like, you run a query, then, oh, I made a mistake, I want to try something else. Oh, I found this, then I want to refine it in this or that way. Like, queries had to come back in a matter of a few seconds to a couple of minutes. Otherwise, people, like, they move on. They try something, then they go do something else, they lose context, they become not very effective at it.
Sounds great. That makes sense. In the spirit of time, I also wanted to cover this aspect of go-to-market for a lot of data-focused startups and generally as well. But I think especially for data-focused startups that are either in your ecosystem or you've been at the helm of affairs for your particular company as well. I'd love to start with Naveen. When you're working or partnering with startups, if you could take like one or two examples and walk us through the thought process that Google Cloud took to partner with those startups from a go-to-market perspective, which kind of accelerates Google Cloud as well, adoption of Google Cloud as well, but also helps fit the need for your customers in the market.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and the thought process in some ways. When we think about like our goal at Google Cloud, right? In the end, we want to deliver accessible and actionable insights to everyone within the organization. And to make that happen, we can't do it alone. So one of the key pillars that we tend to focus a lot is on openness of our platform as well as the ecosystem that we work with. And because we believe it's going to be a federated world in some sense, there is going to be analytical workloads running on premise across clouds, across environments. Openness will play a critical role in terms of how we think the customers will go towards. So I think that's one. we are investing a lot from our standpoint in terms of the open source community. And I think aligning with the partners who are contributing and adding value to that community is a critical pillar. The second key aspect is keeping in mind that the value to the customer is tangible and quick. One of the things that can happen as we think about engaging in partnerships and developing a solution is not take into account how does the customer see that impact in their business KPIs that they want to achieve quickly. So that's an important pillar to not lose sight of it. And the other aspects are more go-to-market related to some extent. One is, does the company that we are engaging with has brownfield potential in terms of disruption in the near term, like they have a customer base that is really looking forward to the product, but also is there a large greenfield opportunity where Google and the company can work together? So that's the third key aspect, I would say. And the fourth one is more about what does the maturity of the startup look like? Have they found the product market fit yet, or are they in the journey of that? And when the product market fit has been found, we see organizations like investing a lot in terms of sales augmentations. What does their sales velocity look like from a bottoms up motion? Like, if they're in the community, how is the community adoption going for their platform, as well as how is the dedicated sales motion playing out within the organization? So those would be the few pillars. In terms of the companies, we partner with quite a few companies within the ecosystem on this approach, and Starburst is a fantastic example of a partnership that we have done in this area, very open source aligned in terms of the work we both are doing there. Examples of companies like Confluent, MongoDB, we partnered with them quite early in their cycle in terms of aligning quickly, contributing within the open source community, and driving value for the enterprise customers. And I think there are a lot more. Every time I talk to you, I find out more about what's happening within the ecosystem, on the open source ecosystem. So it keeps us grounded in terms of what's happening there, as well as how do we deliver customer value through the partners.
If you were to tell the founders one thing that they should do to stand out from the noise, because the ecosystem is getting so noisy, and whether it's in a brownfield use case or a greenfield use case, you'll find tens of companies at different stages coming to you. What should they do to stand out?
So one of the things is, as companies engage with Google, typically the conversation starts more at the technical level as to what is the joint problem we are trying to solve and how we can solve it. Having a prescriptive point of view in terms of here are the areas where we can add value to the product stack that Google already has and deliver value to customers through openness. That's one key pillar. The second one, I think, is something that doesn't come directly, but is a learned process typically. And I would love for companies to understand, it's like each of the cloud providers have a very different go-to-market motion and a sales structure in terms of how they go about it. So it's very hard to see that from the outside. One thing what we have seen impressive companies do is learn the details of the structure quickly, and how do you align in the best way possible in terms of how the organization itself is set up as a go-to-market machine. So in some cases, it has happened naturally because the product alignment has been so strong that it makes the momentum go forward. In other cases, it's a learned process and typically can take a year or so, and not every company has the runway to do so. So one part of my job is to actually provide all that details in terms of how we can bring to bear the overall go-to-market process. And once you align with cloud in terms of a swim lane where there is a sales motion there, success becomes much easier.
Awesome. I'm sure like the companies over here are learning from this and will approach you in a different way going forward. Dan, we've seen the adoption of Heap grow significantly, and like during the pandemic, I'm sure you've seen an evolution in Heap's go-to-market as well. What can founders learn from, and any insights you might have for data products or SaaS products that are selling to data practitioners in this market? Because go-to-market has evolved significantly for a lot of companies given the environment.
Yeah, I guess one thing I would note here for founders or for people building data products is that it certainly seems like at this point I would basically build backwards from what is some way I can enable my company or my product to have a low friction land with a huge company? Like it's just become so expensive and so difficult to get people's attention, and all of the channels people have for accessing decision makers, especially technical decision makers, have become so saturated that it's just really hard to get your product in people's hands if you don't have some kind of way where with very little effort and very little coordination required, someone can get some value out of your tool. So like if you're building a product that is going to require like a top-down full organizational buy-in for your product, like it's just going to be incredibly difficult now. I also think that COVID in general has had for a lot of organizations, like a very decentralizing effect on net. Mm-hmm. So that means that things that just require everyone to be bought in are just going to be really hard to distribute. So if you can figure out some way where like you can solve a problem for one motivated person, or you can make your product such that it requires so little training and so little onboarding that like a small team unilaterally can start using it on their own. Or if you can make your thing onboard so easily, all of these kinds of investments just pay off like many times fold in getting you usage and building the pipeline for like whatever resulting go-to-market you want to layer on top of that. I think open source is like great. Is basically like is basically an example of this. It's like if you can get your thing in people's hands as something they can try for free, but it does have to be the kind of open source thing that can be set up really easily and used really easily. And then you figure out some way to like layer on some kind of monetization on top of that. All this to say, like none of this was not happening before COVID, but all of this is like seems to be really aggressively accelerated by it. And then one that's a bit heap specific, which is part of why we've experienced such unbelievable growth in the last year and a half, is that digital experiences in general have just become so such existential concerns for large organizations. Like all of commerce is intermediated via an app or a website or something like that at some point. So it's just become like the plane of competition for so many businesses because another bank or another lender or another e-commerce or anything else is like one click away. So tools for optimizing these kinds of things, tools for understanding these kinds of things have just like have gone in the last year, in my opinion, from like organizations have some curiosity about this stuff, but it seems very new, to organizations recognize this as like just a need, as a required element of like SaaS they purchase as part of being competitive in 2021. So anything that's at the tailwinds of those things, like just is I guess that's where I'd shoot if I were building a new product.
That makes a ton of sense, and that's also a good transition to. I think you mentioned open source as one of the truly like bottom up ways to kind of get that adoption for ICs, and then subsequently like building something for teams and organizations. Martin, you've done that at Starburst. And the early days, would love to like dial back to kind of the early days of Presto at that time, now Trino. A lot of people want to think about building an open source project and then building a company around it, or using open source as a go-to-market channel. What are your thoughts on like the two approaches? That's one. And secondly, would love to also hear your thoughts on like how did you go about building that early community for Trino? Because a lot of people want to learn about how to solve that cold start problem.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very, very long topic. I mean, we could spend an entire hour talking about this. I mean, it can be a very challenging thing. I think one of the things that you have to think about is what is your, I kind of alluded to that, is what is your goal in thinking about engaging with open source or building an open source project? Like, is it to bring awareness? Do you want your company to be seen more widely, or is it to be able to tap into the engineering talent pool? Like some companies just engage in open source projects and contribute because it makes them look good in the developer community, and it's easier for them to hire more people. I mean, Facebook was an example of this. Like Facebook open source a lot of the building blocks and infrastructure technologies that were not critical to the business. Like they were not part of their products. It's not like you were giving away the crown jewels. and it helped with recruiting. It helped with making bringing awareness of what kind of challenges, technical challenges the company is solving. So it made it easier to hire people. But if you're trying to, on the other hand, if you're trying to bank on open source as a way to attract people to your product, there are a number of considerations you have to take. For example, there's a fine balance you have to deal with in terms of how much you invest in the open source project versus how much you would hold if your monetization is around withholding more advanced features. How much do you help people versus how much you wait or you rely on them coming and buying from you. For example, if your business is around offering support or something like that, and that can be tricky because at times it can feel like if you are engaging with the community, if you're helping people out, if you're having making it easy for people to try the open source software, then it feels like they will take that and then run with it and not engage with you as a company, right? So it feels like sometimes it's against it might be against your business goals, but you have to look at the long term. Like sometimes when you do that, you end up building like better branding for your company. You end up, maybe you don't get an immediate customer, but in the long term, that person then convinces other people to use the tool, the product. They move on to a different company. Everyone starts learning about that tool, and eventually you grow the pie effectively. So those are some of the kind of considerations you have to take. Then there are also issues around governance and licensing. Like, is it a project that you own and you want to control, or do you truly want to build a community around it?
Right.
And I mean, and there are companies that fall in both categories. Like, for example, if you look at MongoDB, they open source their software, but MongoDB is the only one that developed that software, and they have kind of strict licensing that makes it very hard for someone else to pick it up and say build a company around it. There are projects like any of the Apache projects, for instance. Those are kind of more neutral. Like anyone can jump in and participate. So you have to take those things into consideration and figure out how they fit with your goals as a business. I mean, the more neutral your project is, the easier it is to attract more people and attract other companies to participate. So when we're at Facebook, when we built Presto, we built it with the goal of making it open source, and you could say it was kind of more of an altruistic thing. There was no. This was something that came from the team building Presto. It wasn't that the company said, "Oh, you should open source this." Like, we said, "No, we're going to build this. We're going to open source it. We want to make this project available to everyone. It will become better by having other people becoming involved and contributing and using it. Like, it will cater to more broader set of use cases and so on." So that's kind of how we bootstrap the project, and many companies end up getting engaged. Like Teradata was one of those companies, and out of Teradata came the team that ended up building Starburst eventually. There's other companies like Amazon built Athena based on Presto, and Qubel had a whole product based on Presto. So it's like the more neutral you make the project, the more I guess altruistic you make it, the easier it is to build a community of people and developers that will get engaged. So you have to balance that out.
And you've covered a lot in like a short period of time. I know we can talk about this for hours and days, but I'll take a few questions because I know we have a few minutes left. Mahendra has this question: in the modern data stack, how have you seen any novel approaches around managing data quality and degradation? Maybe we can, like, Dan, what kind of data quality measures do you use internally for your end users?
Probably the wrong person to speak this. I mean, it's nothing particularly magical, honestly. It's just a lot of like doing the hard work to define what correct looks like, doing the testing, building the monitoring, iterating. I'm curious. Naveen or Martin might have a better sense of like products that are out there. Though I know there are a whole bunch that have come on the market recently to to let you define that kind of stuff.
At least from my perspective, what I have seen is that data quality has gone from much more of a rules-based approach to much more of an automated function baked into existing tool sets. That's a key approach. So organizations or companies that are leveraging capabilities, machine learning as a part of their data ingestion stack are inherently getting better in enabling data quality. That's one. And the second one is, I think the wings of where do you need data quality is also expanding, because now the data is not just landing in one place, but it's also going to be enabled across different organizations. So data is going to morph its shape as it goes along, and so you need to have the same data quality in some ways enforced across the organization. What does revenue mean within one line of business may not be seen as the same thing in the other line of business. So how do you enforce that data quality rule more at the consumption layer is also a critical part. And I think previously it was more about, I'm ingesting data, let's enforce the quality there, because after that everything is good. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Thanks, Naveen. I'll take one last question before we wrap up. Bombardier has this question: how do you see your products evolve as machine learning adoption becomes more mainstream in the enterprise? I know we've talked a lot about analytics. I think this is a question more around machine learning. Feel free, any one of you, feel free to take this question.
Well, I can share that a big part of this for Heap is that, and this is probably the most exciting way our product has evolved in the last year, is that we have now started shipping features. If you go Google Heap Illuminate, this is really what all this is about, to make the process of understanding your users, or like more generally finding insight from data, more proactive.
Mm-hmm.
That's the stuff that we're the most excited about. It's less a question of like, better predictive modeling or forecasting, or like there's a lot of good stuff like that, and businesses have been building that into their ops for the last like 20 years at this point. But the stuff that we're really excited about is ways we can suggest something that someone needs to know about, or should maybe be aware of, about their users. That's how we see ourselves putting this in people's hands.
Awesome, Dan. Thanks so much. I know Naveen had to drop off at this time, but I think we're coming to the end of the session. So wish we could carry on for a few more hours, because this is a topic close to my heart. This is where I spend most of my time in as well. But thank you so much for joining the session. I'm sure the audience, which are a lot of founders, would have learned a lot from these insights and nuggets, and that too. Thank you for being like so candid and raw about what your point of view is. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Likewise.